Okay, so if we're going to preview the Missouri Tigers and talk about them tonight, let's start on the offensive side of the ball for them. The big question mark's quarterback with Bo Prabula, the Penn State transfer, and then Sam Horn, who's been in the program. Early in the fall practices, neither player has distinguished himself and stepped out in front. So that's still a big question mark. And to me, I know everybody wants to rave about Penn State's quarterback from last year. But if you look at big games, he didn't play that well, and Prabula did not threaten to take time from him. So I know he's athletic. I know they talk highly about his ability to run the ball, but the passing game, what are they going to get out of that? To me, is a big question mark for them. Now, in that passing game, they are replacing their receivers from last year too, but there is talent there in the receiver pool. Kevin Coleman, the transfer from Mississippi State. You have Marquise Johnson, who's a 10-400 guy who they feel confident that can beat defenses deep and get over the top. And then you have Josh Manning, who was a 4-star entering his junior year when he was recruited. So the talent at wide receiver is there if the quarterback play can get them the ball. They also have Ahmad Hardy, who was the number one running back in the transfer portal. So, you combine him with, let's say, Prabula's ability to run the ball. You bring some dual threat things in there. And their offensive line, I think, will be solid. Caden Green is a guard, and he's their best offensive lineman, and they bring back a lot on their line. So I think their offensive line will be solid for them. Again, it just takes you back to the question mark on offense is going to be Bo Prabula or Sam Horn. Will one of those guys step forward? Any countering?
Yeah, I think they're going to end up rolling with Sam Horn at QB1. I think he's a little bit more of an athlete than Prabula, in my opinion. Baseball star, great pitcher, and that doesn't always translate to playing quarterback in the SEC. But he's a guy that I'm high on, and Joshua Manning that you mentioned. I think he's really poised for a breakout year. Where I question them a little bit is Ahmad Hardy. I don't know if he's going to be a guy in the SEC. I think he'll be serviceable, but for, some of the kind of expectations he's got to potentially be a top 3, 5 running back in the league, I just don't see it. I think he's going to be somewhere, I think he's a top 10 back for sure, but I'm not as high on him as a running back as others are. The thing that I probably like the most about all of Missouri football, I really like Drinkwitz. I think he reminds me of like Mike Leach a little bit on the personality side. You just kind of never know what he's going to say. And he's, fielded a couple pretty solid teams over there. Now, doesn't call an offense quite as good as Mike Leach did. But yeah, that's my favorite thing about them is Drinkwitz and then Joshua Manning breaking out, as a good receiver for him.
So I like your pick on Manning because he's on our fantasy team. So I gotta agree with you there. I think he is going to come out. Go ahead, Larry. What were you going to say there?
No, I was going to say, I'm big on Horn too. I saw him here in Georgia, Collins Hill guy, teammates with Heisman winner Travis Hunter, two-sport guy. He was I want to say he just signed with the Dodgers a few weeks ago. I thought I read that. No, he was
Yes.
drafted by them. I'm pretty sure they signed him. So,
Yeah.
he's a two-sport athlete, a really bright kid, has some experience. I kind of see him winning that battle as well. And they don't forget they had the number 7 transfer portal class this last year too. So they brought some studs in. 7 is pretty strong, especially for a Mizzou program and trying to win, trying to go 3 straight years winning 10 games, which Mizzou I don't believe has ever done in their history. That's going to be a big thing for them this year. I don't know that they have the horses to get there. And I'm not quite as sold on Drinkwitz as you are, Dmac. But, like I said, they did land a great transfer portal class. I think Horn is a serviceable quarterback, schedule wise, I don't think they have the toughest schedule in the SEC this year. They always seem to fare well in scheduling. I don't know why, but 10 wins isn't out of the question for me. What are your thoughts, Kev?
So I like some of what you guys are saying there. I like Horn, honestly. If he doesn't win it by game one, I really do think by the time they get into conference season, I think Horn will be the quarterback. For Perbula to not be the guy, that's telling us something. Now, I don't disagree with you also, Dmac, on Ahmad Hardy. But here's my name for you when it comes to the running back. Marquise Davis, 4-star freshman out of Ohio, highly recruited guy. I think so. I mean, the talent's there with him. I would not be surprised if by the middle of the season he's not getting a lot of carries for him. And then the person that I really like on their coaching staff is Kirby Moore, the offensive coordinator that's been with them for 2 years now. You know, a couple of years ago, he really impacted their running game in a positive way. And I really like him. I think he will keep their offense in a good place between their line. You combine Hardy with Davis and then their receivers. I think he'll keep their offense upright and in a good spot. And again, we've already mentioned Kevin Coleman as one of the transfers, and Larry, like you mentioned, they had a good transfer portal group. So you jump from there to the defensive side of the ball. Their defensive side of the ball starts at the receiver, or not the receiver, but the safeties and the linebackers are the big parts of their defensive side of the ball. You've got Jalen Catalana transfer at safety, and he's going to play a big part in their defense. You also have Josiah Trotter, a West Virginia linebacker transfer. He's going to play a big part in their defense too. So Missouri on the defensive side of the ball, their strengths are going to lie in their safety play and their linebacker play. Safety play, they've got Jalen Catalana transfer that's in his 6th year that played at UNLV last year, but he's also an ex-SEC guy at Arkansas and Texas. He didn't play much at Texas because he got hurt, but he's been a willing tackler over the years. So he'll be an addition for him in the safety position. They also have Marvin Burks in the safety area and Dylan Carnell, who plays nickel. He'll come up and tackle the ball. So they're strong back in that part of their defense. And then on the linebacker play, Justin Newsom, who's been there and started for him. He's a senior this year, a grad senior, so he's a 5th-year guy. He's played a lot for him, started a lot of games for him. He's going to be key. And then Josiah Trotter, who transferred from West Virginia, was a starter for them last year and had over 70 tackles. He will be the middle linebacker and give them the strength there. Another, you mentioned, Larry, the transfer portal and the guys that they got out of that. Damon Wilson was a Georgia guy. He will be their outside linebacker, edge guy that will play in that 3-4-4-3 sometimes, put his hand in the dirt. But he's going to be a guy that will be very effective rushing the passer. If he was at Georgia this year, he'd be playing a lot for them too. But you've got the portal and NIL, and Missouri reached out and got him, and so I think he'll give them a lot. And then opposite him, you have Zion Young at defensive end. He's a talented guy that can get after the passer too. And then, to me, probably the most underrated defensive tackle, nose tackle type guy, Chris McClellan, who had right at 40 tackles last year and 2.5 sacks with some pressures. He's a very underrated guy in the middle that can create pressure. So I think defensively, they have a lot of strengths and they're good at every level. Defensive line, edge, linebacker, and definitely good in the safety play piece. So I think they'll be good on the defensive side. And then their cornerbacks are very experienced. Dre Norwood and Stephen Hall, even though Stephen Hall is a transfer this year, those guys are very experienced. So I think they'll be solid defensively to go along with a solid offense that probably won't be an elite offense. So anyhow, what do you guys think on that one?
The one thing I like about how things line up for Mizzou this year, first of all, they don't have a road game until like week 8 or 9, so they don't even see the road until mid-October, which is kind of wild. I don't know if that was a scheduling quirk or that seems to be an awful lot of home games early. Secondly, as I look at their 2 deep, they have, I don't see. I see one underclassman starting, two underclassmen, one on offense, one on defense, and they're both transfers. So that means these kids are, they got a lot of men there are a lot of 23-year-old kids, 24-year-old kids on this team with the 5th and 6th year seniors. And I think that'll play into that as well, giving them that extra experience and that, that age. There's a big difference between a 24-year-old man and an 18-year-old kid. And with all these COVID transfers on their way out, this is kind of the last class of them. Mizzou certainly will, we'll see if they'll be able to take advantage of that with all the veteran help that they have at home and that they brought in the off season. And like I said, having 8 games or not going on the road until week 8 or something like that, that's pretty wild. It lines up well for them early. It's obviously like everybody else staying healthy. Defensively, they've got some guys that'll go after the football and hit you in the mouth. I agree with you, Kev. I think that Chris McClellan is one of the most overrated nose guards in the country. He's always there, and when he's not making plays himself, he's bringing up his backers to get in there and make plays for him. So I really like him in the middle. Vegas has them at 7.5. If I were a betting man, I would bet over.
I certainly would. That schedule.
What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah. So obviously their D-line edge is going to be good along with linebackers. But a guy that sticks out to me from the quarterback room, and you mentioned him, Dre Norwood. He's a guy who started all 13 games last season for him. Been on the field for over 1,500 snaps for him. That's the type of guy you want in the cornerback room. And Stephen Hall's going to be good to transfer from Washington State. But I think Dre Norwood's got the potential to, he's gotten better each year. He finished last year with a couple picks, like 40 tackles, didn't really get thrown at a ton. He was truly their cornerback one. And, I don't think teams are going to have that guy that they're just going to throw at him 10 times a game when he's covering them. So I think he's going to have a really good season. And I'm high on Marvin Burks too. He had 65, 70 tackles last year. So, a guy who can cover some and help in run support. So those are two guys that stick out to me on defense. They're too deep everywhere. Like you said, Sweets is solid. If they stay healthy, the defense is going to be their bread and butter.
I'll tell you who I like. Who else I like on that defense, and he's a backup for right now. But Toriano Pride is a cornerback as well. He's a senior who was formerly in the Clemson program. But last year he had almost 40 tackles, 39 tackles, a forced fumble, 2 picks, and 4 passes defense. So he's a willing tackler as a cornerback, and he's also he can get his nose around the ball as witnessed by 2 picks and having 4 passes defense. Him being a backup for them speaks volumes to how much depth they do have in their secondary. So they've got some talent there.
Yep. So if I just run down their schedule real quick, UCA first game of the season, that's a win. That's that's a rental. Kansas week 2. So Kansas is talented. They bring in a team that's well coached, and Lance Leopold does a great job with them, and they'll be athletic and can run the ball. Playing at Missouri, I think Kansas still wins that game. So I think they go 2-0 there. Louisiana week 3, that's a win. South Carolina week 4, that's a game that could be a little bit edgy for them. And I'm going to say that by week 4, they've got to have solid quarterback play, or that game could get them. I think they'll win the game because they're playing at home, but that could be one if they're still having indecision about who their quarterback is. That game could be one they lose. But let's say they're 4-0, UMass 5-0. The week after that, then they play Alabama at home. That's a game if their quarterback play is good, that Alabama on the road, we know last year they had struggles on the road. So that's a game they could make very interesting. I don't think they'll beat Alabama, but, I'll be interested to watch that game if by that time, week 6, they have good quarterback play. So I got them 5-1 at that point. Then their first road game is Auburn at Auburn. I don't think they get that game on the road. I think Auburn's good this year with their skill talent. So I got them 5-2. They go to Vandy after that. I think they'll beat Vandy. And then they play Texas A&M at home. I don't know about that game. It's a toss-up, but let's put it in the loss category, and we might come back to that game. Then they play Mississippi State. That's a win. They play at Oklahoma. Again, that's Oklahoma's an interesting team to me. Everybody thinks they're going to be really good, but I still question their offensive line. So I think that game could be very competitive. Let's say it's a loss. Then they go to Arkansas at the end. I think they beat Arkansas. Drink always gets him up for Arkansas because he's from that area, and he's won like 7 out of 9 games against Arkansas. So that would put them at 8-4. And you go back to that Aggie game, if they were to get that game, they're a 9-3 team. And then, just best case scenario, let's say they beat Auburn or Alabama. They just beat one of those teams. They could end up 10-2. So I think they're anywhere from 8-4 to a 10-2 type team. I do agree with you that 7.5 to me looks like a pretty good play for them to get over that with the talent that they have. And you know, like Drinkowitz or not, and I'm not the hugest fan of him himself, but his teams rarely beat themselves. They don't play poorly in games and they don't beat themselves. They don't have a lot of turnovers. They don't have a lot of penalties. To me, he does a very good job of getting his teams to play within themselves with focus and what they need to do for execution. Dmac, I agree with you there. I just think he's a little bit squirrely, but I do think he does a solid job coaching his team.
Yeah, I just kind of like that whole yeah, some of the stupid stuff he says on camera. You know, if
You
I'm
like it or
like
you hate it.
yeah, if I'm like a mid-level player, I mean, if I'm a 5-star, I'm not going to Mizzou probably. But if I'm like a high 3-star and Mizzou offers me, like, okay, he's a coach I could play for.
And that may be why he does it, because it's effective. And from the standpoint, he comes off as a guy that's a cool guy. And like you say, kind of that Leach personality. And hey, I can go play for that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, anything else on Missouri? Anybody else have any thoughts on them?
No, I'm with you, Kev. Like I said, if I were a bet man, I like them over 7.5. I think 8 or 9 is very doable for them. Perhaps 10 if everything breaks right. You never know what you're going to get. It's all going to depend on health and how quickly those transfers are able to integrate and gel with the rest of their new teammates. They got a bunch of them in there, so but they're mature. Like I said, they're all upperclassmen, so they're a very mature football team, and that helps.
The one player I didn't mention that will come into play a little bit is another running back, Roberts. He does a good job for him in short yardage. So, I think that between Roberts, Hardy, and Davis, the freshman, I think they'll get enough there out of the running back. It
I
all comes down to that quarterback play, whether they go from 8 wins or they shock the world and beat Bama at home.
Yep, I agree. I agree.
All right, DMAC, are you rolling with Texas A&M next?
I am rolling with the Aggies
Oh,
tonight. So,
Lord,
Rolling with the homies.
and
rolling with the Colts.
I think I may be a little higher on the Aggies than most people. So let's start with their offense. Marcel Reed going to be quarterback. I know everybody's seen some of the videos from fall camp, some of the passing woes, but I think he finished with 22 touchdowns last year, 15 passing, 7 rushing. I think he's going to finish in the, roughly 20, 23 passing and probably 12 to 15 rushing. I think they're going to lean on his legs a lot and use that to kind of buy some time for him to find guys open. I don't think he has to be, Joe Burrow or Garrett Nussmeier on timing for them to be successful. I think he really just needs to be serviceable. And I really like their wide receiver room, KC Conception or Concepcion, however you say that. I think he's going to be a big piece for them transferring from NC State. He had 50 catches, 6 touchdowns last year at NC State. I'd expect to see that uptick, probably close to 70, 75 receptions, maybe 8 or 9 touchdowns. He's going to be a primary piece. Mario Carver is going to be another big piece for them. I think the biggest question from their wide receiver room is who is going to be wide receiver 3. I know they've got Terry Bussey poised for a big season. Jonah Wilson's another guy I like who's 6'2", hasn't done a ton in college, transferring from Houston, but I love his measurables. Their biggest strength is definitely their offensive line. Trey Zune is a dog at left tackle. If I had to pick my favorite offensive line in the league, I'm rolling with Texas A&M. A lot of older players that got, 3 seniors and 2 juniors anchoring that offensive line. Now if they have some injury after that is where things get a little hazy. They've got 3 freshmen, true freshmen or redshirt freshmen behind But, their true freshman, Lamont Rogers, is extremely talented if he's going to step up into a role. And I am high on their running backs. Le'Veon Moss, I think he's going to stay healthy this year. And, he's a Baton Rouge kid, so I watched him play a lot in high school. He was really good. Reuben Owens and Amari Daniels are both guys I think are going to have a role, and I think they're going to fill those roles well. So I think their offense is going to be pretty talented. A couple question marks at tight end. With Amari Neblick, he didn't do much at Texas before transferring over. After that, they've got another transfer from Nebraska who, could see a role. But, if they can stay healthy, I think their offense is going to be successful, especially behind that offensive line. They're going to create time for Marcel Reed. They're gonna run quite a bit of RPO, a lot of just kind of read stuff. So that he can shine. Him staying healthy is probably the biggest piece of this offense, with how much they're going to run and depend on his legs. He could see some injury throughout the season. So then, after that, you've got Miles O'Neil and Jacob Zeno. I would think Zeno probably fits their offense a little better. From an offense perspective, I think they're going to be pretty good with definitely the offensive line kind of leading the way for them.
I agree with that. I think their line is definitely one of the top lines in the conference, probably in the country. They're probably a top three offensive line nationwide. In the offseason, we all discussed this ad nauseum before, especially through our little SEC fantasy draft and whatnot about Marcel Reed. I still have nightmares of Marcel Reed just destroying us last year after he came in for Connor Wegman and beating us. We had the game under control until they made that switch. We had no answers for Marcel Reed. The kid's very talented. He's obviously a dual threat kid, great runner. He can pass the ball. That's not his strongest suit. But I think with the time that they're going to have, he's going to, we'll find out pretty early whether he's able to be patient and sit in the pocket and wait for receivers to get open, or if instinct will take over and he just takes off running when he doesn't need to. If he's able to stay back there and bide his time to let those receivers get open, I think the offensive line will give it to him, and I think Texas A&M is going to be tough stop on offense. We'll see.
I think their talent matches their offensive coordinator, Colin Klein. The game that he wants to call, I think their talent matches that perfectly. Strong offensive line. He likes to run a lot of RPOs, counters, traps, very diverse running game. He came from Kansas State, same type of, offense that they ran at Kansas State. And he was the OC there, and he's in his second year. So I think Reed fits that perfectly. And so I think their running game and I think their interior offensive line is as good as it gets. And I agree that they're the strongest O-line in the conference. So I think that really leads to them being an effective offense. I think Craver is a talented receiver in Concepcion. I'm not sure if their passing game will be elite, but I don't think it has to be for what they want to do. I think if they throw for 2,800 yards, and I think they're going to run for 150 to 200 a game between their running backs and their quarterbacks, and that's going to give them ball control. And they're solid on defense. We'll get into that. I like their style of offense for how it matches what they want to do.
I
no,
agree.
I completely agree.
I agree too. I think their running game. I mean, between Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens, Reuben Owens was very highly sought after as well. And the fact that Moss has been able to hold him off and keep that RB1, title says a lot for how good he is as well. So I think that they're loaded in the backfield, which lines up well with that offensive line that they got. Like you said, Kevin, if they throw for 2,600 plus, that will be plenty enough to keep teams honest, I think, and give that offensive line time to do their thing and then create a lot of holes for the running backs and Reed as well. Now to the defense.
Yeah, I think defense is going to be a strength, especially linebacker, safeties, cornerbacks. I love Mike Elko, calling defensive plays for him. I think that from a defensive mind standpoint, he's, top 10 brightest in college football right now. What I really like is their safeties with Dalton Brooks, and Bryce Anderson is going to play a lot, but Marcus Ratcliffe too. They've got three really talented guys in that safety area. And then they've got Jordan Shaw playing nickelback. I'm high on Bryce Anderson. He's been around for a while in the program. Didn't do a ton last year, battled a little bit of injury. Back in 2023, though, he had 7 tackles for loss. Now that he's finally healthy, ready to go, I think he's not only going to be a leader on this team, but he's going to really impact the game from a run support and, blitzing as a safety sum. And then you go to their cornerbacks, Julio Humphrey from Georgia, I think was a great find for them in the transfer portal, along with Will Lee. Will Lee had 40 tackles last year, 10 pass defenses, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble. So they've got a lot of experience in that third level there. They're going to be really good there. And then you move up to their linebackers, with Terry and York and Scooby Williams, I think is going to be a lot better than people think he's going to be this year. He's, coming off. He's a transfer from Florida a couple years ago, got some playing time last year. I actually saw him a couple years ago when he was in high school over at Ramsey out of the Birmingham area, 4 or 5 years ago. Really, really sound player. And another linebacker that I am really high on for them. I actually drafted him in our league. Is Damian Sanford. I think he's going to play a lot this year. So they've got plenty of guys at linebacker too. Defensive line and defensive end. I'm not as high on the defensive ends. Cassius Howell's going to be good. Um, TJ Searcy is, I think, projected to start at defensive end for them from Florida. But I think Dayon Hayes may be the guy that breaks in, the transfer from Colorado at the defensive end spot. Now, DJ Hicks is, a guy who had a ton of hype coming out of high school, hasn't really lived up to it. But at some point, his size and raw strength has got to show up. I think it starts to show up more this year. You know, the deeper you go on the defensive line, I'm not as high on, Tyler Onyedem is a transfer from Iowa State. He provides some good depth. But what I'm most excited about are their linebackers, their safeties, and their cornerbacks. I think Humphrey and Lee are pretty close to being the best duo at cornerback in the league. And then you do have a little bit of depth there with Des Ricks and Javon Thomas, that can provide some relief. But I think, being in Elko's system, him taking over play calling, he's going to set these guys up to make plays. Now it's just on them to go out and execute. That's what I think of their defense.
I agree with you on Elko being a huge part of their defense. And I agree with a lot of the elements that you mentioned, linebacker and defensive line. Linebacker's definitely their strength and safety, and their line is solid. I will also agree that I don't see their line as dominant as last year. So I think there's a solid defensive line, but they're not an overpowering defensive line. Cornerback, I think, is going to be interesting for them. I love Will Lee. Humphrey, though, struggled a little bit some last year at Georgia. And then Des Ricks, he got burned a lot last year. Now, granted, he was playing as a redshirt freshman. So that, he got his experience and we'll see if he's grown. Sometimes when you're playing out there on an island by yourself and you're young, you got to go through those growing pains before you get good. So we'll see, there. But, Humphrey does have a lot of games he's played. He's pretty much started 2 seasons at Georgia. So if he adds and is a good cornerback too for them, then I think overall their defense is solid. So I don't think they're, a team that's going to give up a game because of their defense by no means. I think the interesting thing to me for A&M is the matchups. To me, you're going to have a good defensive front to match up against their offense. And then to me also, you better have a good passing game to affect their defense. I think if you do have a good passing game, you can keep their linebackers honest where they're not edging up to play against the run. And then that way their defensive line will not be as dominant with how that plays. I think a team that has a good defensive front and a good passing game is the type of team that can beat them. But again, they're a team that could easily go from 8-4, 10-2 type team. Now we know Aggie is 8-4. They own that one. But they're a good enough team, and they'll be well coached enough that they might go above that. What do you think, Sweets, on the defense?
They're over under depending on where you look, it's anywhere from 7.5 to 8.5. I'm not as high on them as Dmac is. I still think that they're, I like Elko as a defensive coach. I just don't know about their talent level, especially on the defensive line. I like their secondary. Their linebackers are solid. I think Texas A&M. I think their strong suit is the offensive side of the ball for me this year, and what they're going to be able to do with that now. Are they able to get off that 8-4 mark that they always seem to end up at every year? I don't know. I'm with you, Kev. I think they could go anywhere from 7-5. Let me take a look at their schedule real quick, just to break it down. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and break down their schedule, and then we'll just we'll put in with you on that.
Yeah, so they open up the season with UTSA at home. I think that's a win. Then they've got Utah State at home, another win. Then they go on the road to Notre Dame. This is where things can get messy. I'm taking the Aggies against Notre Dame this year.
That's a bold one.
I've kind of flip-flopped in my mind which way to go. And, my cousins who are going to be tuning into this, huge Notre Dame fans. So they're going to hate this. But, Notre Dame doesn't know who's playing quarterback. They lost a good bit from their defense last year. I'm taking A&M in a low-scoring game. That's going to be a lot of running the football, whether that's with Moss or Marcel Reed. I'm thinking that's 17-14, 21-17 game. It's going to be close, but I'm edging out with A&M here. Then they've got Auburn at home. I'm picking them to beat Auburn at home early. If that game was, in Auburn, probably be a different story. Then they get a true tune-up game with Mississippi State October 4th. They're going to win that one. And then with Florida coming in, if DJ Lagway's healthy, I'm taking Florida in this one. So that puts them at 5-1 through 6 games. At Arkansas, I think they're going to bounce back. That's going to be another close one, but A&M's going to edge them out. Then they travel to LSU. I don't think Marcel Reed's going to run all over LSU like he did last year, even though I just watched Blake Baker juke out a defensive back. I think LSU is going to win this one, and I don't think it's going to be, extremely close like a field goal or a touchdown. I think it's going to be 10, 17-point win for the Tigers. They've got a bye week, then they travel to Mizzou. I'm going to take them against Mizzou up there. Then they get South Carolina at home, which is another one that I could see going either way. I'm going to roll with the Aggies here. Then they get the Jimbo Fishers, Samford. They're going to win that game big. Then they travel to Texas to end the season. So they're going into that game at 9-2, and Texas is going to beat them. I think it might be close for the first half. I think Texas just has too many dudes. And, if they're still in contention for a playoff berth in the SEC title, that means Arch Manning's doing his job. So I don't think A&M can stop him. The Tiger in me wants to say 8-4, 7-5. I'm going to roll with 9-3 for the Aggies this year.
Looking at their schedule, I think that's
So you
certainly.
basically give them all the time. Go ahead, Larry.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, I'm looking at the schedule. I don't think they beat Notre Dame. I do think they beat Auburn at home. They're not losing to Mississippi State. I think they'll beat Florida at home, and especially if without Lagway. Love Harrison Bailey, great kid. He's not DJ Lagway. Going to Arkansas, that's always a tricky place. Always a tricky place. I could see them winning that game. That's kind of a toss up for me. LSU, I think Kelly has this game circled. I think the LSU faithful have this game circled, and if LSU is still in the thick of things, while that's going on, then I think that LSU comes out and gets a 10-point win here. Mizzou at home. I think Texas A&M is a better team than Mizzou. But again, you're going on the road in the SEC. That one's a toss up too. South Carolina, another one. If Sellers is healthy, he can cause those guys a lot of trouble, especially on that defense front. They're going to beat Samford, and then the shootout, Texas A&M. I just don't think there's any way they beat Texas at home, in Austin. If both teams are at full strength, Texas should win that game by 10 points. So I say I'm not as high on you on them. I can see 9 wins for them, but 7 wins wouldn't surprise me either. If I was a betting man, I would avoid this one like the plague.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch their over-under because, yeah, like you said, I mean, I've got Florida upsetting them, but that could go either way. If Lagway's out, that's a different story, but I'm with you on Arkansas, Missouri, and Carolina. I think if my prediction of them losing to Florida, I don't think they drop back to Arkansas. Kind of the same thing with LSU losing to LSU. I don't know if they spiral and lose to Missouri. And I have not been to a game at Missouri yet. That's one of only, a couple schools I haven't been to a road game at. So I don't know what their environment's like fully. Now if they're going on the road at Florida or Auburn, those are games I'm picking the home team in. But Missouri, I just not having been there, I don't have enough faith in their home environment. And in South Carolina, I'm predicting Sellers being a little banged up by November 15th. So I think that gives them an easier path. And then, the one game I probably will bet might be Texas A&M, Texas, and it's going with the horns on that one.
Yeah. So looking at their schedule, as you broke it down, you pretty much went with the games that they might lose in. You took the teams like Texas and LSU are definitely going to be favored over A&M on the road, and I think those 2 games they lose. Again, when you look at the matchups, like I mentioned earlier, those teams have good defensive fronts this year, and they have the ability to pass the ball. So I think they keep their defense off balance. I think those are 2 definite losses. And then when you go into the toss-up column, like Notre Dame and Florida are games that are like strong toss-ups to me. I think they definitely lose one of those and maybe could lose both. And then when I look at Missouri, South Carolina, Arkansas, I call those games toss-ups. South Carolina because of Sellers, and he could be banged up, but he's also athletic enough. I was listening to something today. Last year when South Carolina played Texas A&M, in the second half alone, Sellers broke 27 tackles. So he can take over a game at sometimes, and you never know if this is the game it takes him over. I mean, that's a game that they could lose. And then on the road in Missouri, you're exactly right. Missouri's, I went there a couple years ago when LSU pulled out a win late. It's a journalism school, okay? And they're great, got a great journalism school, but they're not the rowdiest fans in the world. I'll tell you that right now. And it's 65,000 and end zones are pretty open. So doesn't hold the sound in there. They could get a win, but it's also a game though that, if Missouri plays up, they could lose. And in Arkansas, that game means a lot to Arkansas. And they finally got that game out of Dallas where they did not perform well against A&M there in Jerry World. And playing that game at home, ex Southwest Conference teams, that game's going to be huge for Arkansas on that campus. It's early enough in the season. It's still where Sam Pittman's got a fighting chance to keep his job. I think, and Taylor Green, I think that game could be very dicey for A&M. So I just don't see them going better than 8-4. I think with all the toss-up games, they lose a couple of them, and they definitely lose to Texas and LSU.
Yeah, I mean, I'm normally an 8-4 guy on the Aggies, but
it's a safe place.
It is. It's the safest place to be. But if they go 9-3, the Aggie fans love me right now.
That's right.
You
That
know,
is
I
true.
I just took a peek
That
at
is true.
Missouri's since 2019 they're 30-9 at home. So they're a little bit above 75% winning percentage at home. So they're formidable at home. A lot better on the home than they are the road.
Oh, definitely.
yeah, I agree. The Arkansas game is definitely going to be rowdy. I like the Arkansas environment. They're just rowdy Arkansasians, whatever you would call them. They're not Florida from a brutality standpoint, but they still get plenty rowdy up there and
I think this
north
is
of central Louisiana.
That's right. I think this is the Tennessee game for Arkansas last year. This will be a night game. It'll be loud. This will mean a lot to them. A&M could go in there and win, but they're going to have to go in. That will be a very rowdy environment. Like I say, to me, it'll be much like Tennessee last year.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Go ahead, Dane.
No, you're good, Sweets. I lost my train of thought, to be honest. So you're
I
good.
apologize. Like I said, I could see them, if everything breaks right for them, I could see them winning, 10 games. I could see them winning 7 as well. 8-4 is really safe for me with Texas A&M. So, I'll just call it that. And, if I'm right, then, so is 99% of the college football world. So I join the crowd there.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely in the minority at 9-3, but I'm now I'm taking A&M against Notre Dame. They lose that one. Maybe they beat Florida, then lose to Arkansas, and then we're right at 8-4 again. So a lot hinges on them beating Notre Dame for that to happen. If they don't beat Notre Dame, I don't think there's any way they get to 9-3. I don't think they'll spiral and go 5-7 or anything. But 8-4 is probably likely if they don't win that September 13th.
Yeah, they're I haven't followed their fan base as much as I usually do. Usually this time of year, I'm getting a few good laughs out of what comes out of their boards, but I haven't been on there much this year. I do think that they, 10-2, why not? They could if everything breaks right for them, and if they're 10-2 in the SEC, they're going to the playoff. I don't see how an SEC team goes 10-2 and is held out. Now, if 10-2 puts them in the SEC championship game and they lose that, end up at 10-3, and it might get a little funky. But then you go back to what does the committee think? Are they punishing people for their championship games, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, they didn't punish the ACC last year for it, so tough to punish the SEC this year if it happens.
They got punished in their games, so it came back around.
Oh, yeah, no, they did for sure.
I'm looking forward to a
So
great
cool.
season. Just hoping that everybody's able to stay healthy and see who does what. High expectations for a lot of teams. I've got really high expectations for LSU, and I'm not sure why, because for me, a lot of LSU, just on this topic, it depends on game one. Game one is imperative for me this year. If we lose that game, then all the goodwill that's been built up kind of washes away, and you get that that negativity, that toxicity around the program. So it's very, very important to get that first one out of the way. I think if LSU
I agree.
does
How were
Clemson,
you guys doing yesterday? How were you guys doing yesterday with the Nuss news breaking?
I was fine because I
I just didn't buy it from the beginning. So I never really went down the path of he's hurt for this. I just never went into that.
I didn't get to participate in it. I'm getting ready to move Larry to school on Saturday, so we've had a lot going around here, and haven't been on the boards as much. But when I caught up to it this morning, I was like, oh Lord, things really went off the rails here. And the guy the poster who posted the original news is usually a pretty solid guy with pretty solid intel. So he missed
it's
one.
about 25 minutes, but
Yeah.
it quickly got corrected.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, you know what? Every one of us has been wrong on something like that before, and that's why you don't throw out the SOS before you have that news out. Like I said, if it's
The things that concern me though if he were to be hurt, is I'm not hearing a lot of great things about Van Buren right now as far as his accuracy.
No.
So if Nuss were to be hurt, we're going to have to depend on our defense quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, because we
Yeah,
don't have because Hurley's not an overly accurate quarterback either. So, and that's kind of Nuss's thing is dropping dimes. So that certainly would hurt, but
Can you guys hear me? Because Sweet, you're fading in and out on
I
mine.
I
I
can hear
can
you
hear
fine.
you. I'm losing sweets a little bit. I'm losing sweets
Yeah.
every now and then.
It might be that piece of shit AT&T.
You were good through the through the two teams. You were good through both teams, but just here as we're just kind of chatting, it's kind of coming and going.
Yeah, it could be my connections. But I can see like I'm pixelating a little bit. And Kev, you're a little fuzzy. Daniel, you're as clear as a bell.
It's coming
I
and
don't know.
going.
Who knows? What
We want to
what's
try
Gum
to
did
do
did
Auburn
anybody
because
did
again,
anybody talk to
I
Gumbo
think I
tonight?
did okay on Auburn, Larry, but I did have that dead spot. I think I can do better. And with all of us here, it seems like we're having pretty good back and forth tonight. Let me do Auburn again.
Okay.
Yeah, we are doing good with all three of us involved in the conversation. I like this aspect a little more.
Yeah, I would agree. See there, he's back.
I'm here. I'm going off camera for 1 sec, but I'm here.
Can't hear you
And I can
though.
hear you fine. You can't hear
I
me?
can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, I
Can you
see him talking, no words, just your mouth moving.
I'll go out and come back in.
Maybe go all the way out and back on. He's kind of froze right there.
Yeah, now it looks like he may be frozen. He may be logging off and coming back on.
We'll give that a second, then we'll do Auburn. Yeah, I agree with all three of us. It's been pretty good. I think
Yeah.
we could those first two, maybe just a little minor editing and cleans up pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think we did pretty well there. How do I sound? I'm still a little under the weather here.
If you everything fine, can't tell it.
Okay, good.
You've been real congested. That's the thing I remember about COVID is it's like you got a drunk of congestion in your head. I mean, you just like constantly releasing it all day.
Yeah, I finally got my sense of taste back
That's
today
good.
because I ate lunch on Monday and I took the day off Friday, just like tried to recoup. Then Saturday I went to a fishing rodeo, still sick, but Sunday felt a little better. Monday I ate lunch and I had dinner tonight down here in New Orleans, and that was the first time I had eaten since lunch on Monday.
Well, if you're gonna eat in New Orleans, it's good that you were able to taste it.
Yeah, we got
Good.
some Cajun food. We did fried alligator. Couldn't really taste it, but then I got some spicy meat pies. I could taste those, so that was good.
Gotcha.
One of my favorite snacks is anything with peanut butter. I tried a spoon of peanut butter last night, and I was like, peanut butter is disgusting. I don't know if I ever want to eat it again.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah,
So obviously you're a Reese's fan if you like peanut butter.
oh yeah, that is my number one candy. I tend to, as much as I love the peanut butter cups, I tend to go Reese's sticks quite a bit.
I agree with that. I love Reese's sticks. Kim and I, my wife, we both love Reese's in general, but give me the sticks over the peanut butter cups. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the cups, but Reese's sticks, I love them.
Like the Reese's All-Star game for the Final Four that Cam Carter played in. We went and watched him for a little bit, and they were giving away all kinds of Reese's stuff. And then do you know the YouTube guy Mr. Beast?
Yeah,
So he's got his Beast candy bars. He was guerrilla marketing around San Antonio, all through the river walk by the Alamo. He was just handing out, or his team handing out handfuls of his chocolate peanut butter bar, all his candy bars to combat Reese's and Hershey having the contract with the Final Four.
was it pretty good? His stuff
It
pretty
was.
good.
It was. I was impressed. I don't know. I don't know if it was. I don't think it was better than a Reese's. I'm too loyal to Reese's. I would never give them up for his candy bar anyway, because I am kind of a Reese's loyalist here.
I'm a Reese's fan, and it's so it's really interesting, and I guess my years in retail caused me to do this. I'll go in and I'll look at the amount of footage like a convenience store or a grocery store has to Reese's, and it's really pretty incredible when you just look at the amount of shelf space that places give it. I mean, it's a dominant snack without a doubt.
When I was a kid, we got a rabbit. I was probably in fourth or fifth grade. It was an Easter gift from my parents, and it was like blackish brown with a little bit of like peanut butter color through its skin. We named the rabbit Reese's,
That's sweet.
and he
Well,
was like our pet for 10 years. So we had a really long lived rabbit. So
name Reese. That's
yeah,
another
our
reason you
our
can't
whole
give it.
house is big Reese's fans.
If you had a rabbit, you can't give it. You can't, or if you had a pet for that, Reese's is going to always be in the top 10.
Yeah.
All right, I don't know if he's going to come back in or not. I sent him a text. He hadn't answered. I don't know. Maybe if he, we may start and just go, and then if he jumps back in, we'll roll. But let's go ahead and start with Auburn and just see. So, all right. So to talk about Auburn now. So this is my surprise team in the SEC this year. I'm a big believer in what Auburn has. And Auburn's one of those teams that, you know, when you talk bad about them and everybody seems to be down on Hugh Freeze and Auburn, whenever Auburn is talked bad about, that's when they can kind of jump up and get you, especially if they have talent. And I'm a big believer in their talent and what they have this year. They've got one of the better offensive lines in the country. I'm not sure it's the or in the SEC. I'm not sure it's the best, but they're a top 4 or 5 offensive line. Got a lot of experience across their offensive line. And then both their tackles have a lot of experience. Mason Murphy is a transfer from USC, but Xavier Chaplin was a starter for him last year at left tackle, and he's back. Connor Lew, maybe the best center in the league, him or the center at Florida. And then to me on their offense, their wide receiver group is as good as any in the country. They match up as well as anybody. Cam Coleman, to me, he's a type of athlete like Julio Jones. I'm not sure he has his mental makeup, but just a great athlete that wide receiver, 6'5" guy that can do anything and go up and get the ball. And then opposite him, you have Eric Singleton, who's a 4'2" guy that was at Georgia Tech, had over 1,400 yards receiving the last 2 years and a running offense. So you match those two up with Malcolm Simmons, who's a great athlete, and then Perry Thompson, who was one of the highest recruited guys 2 years ago. They've got 4 or 5 guys that can beat you at wide receiver. Jackson Arnold's an interesting quarterback out of high school, 5-star guy that everybody loved and everybody wanted. Last year he had a down year, and now it's everybody kind of wants to talk poorly and say that he can't get it done. I'm kind of the belief that OU, with all the injuries they had last year at wide receiver, their offensive line was the worst in the conference. I'm kind of the belief that Jackson Arnold is the guy that's going to bounce back this year. We know he's a tough guy and he can run the ball also. He's got some dual threat ability. I think with their offensive line talent and their receiver talent, I think we see him build his confidence through the year, and he gives them a good year at quarterback. Maybe not a great year, maybe not an all conference year, but with the talent they have on offense, they don't need him to be all conference. They just need him to have a good year, 3,000 yard type year with 25 touchdowns, 9, 10 interceptions, and they'll win a lot of games. Running game is going to have to be by committee. Damari Alston, Jeremiah Cobb, Darrell Robinson. And I'm going to throw out a name on a guy who was was a 3-star guy at Auburn High School that they really like is Omar Mabson. I think you'll see him run the ball some too. So I think between those 4 guys, they'll have enough in the running game to get things done. Hugh Freeze definitely always loses some games that he should win, but I think offensively he's a good enough coach when you give him good wide receivers that he can mix it up enough and be a very effective coach as far as getting things done offensively. Dmac, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, another guy in that wide receiver room that I like is Horatio Fields, the Wake
Mm-hmm.
Forest transfer. He's not going to start, but he's going to be a rotation guy coming off a 40 reception season last year. Like, that's such a good piece to have. He was still playing competitive football in the ACC to some degree. So it's not like you're getting a kid from Liberty or from UTEP or UTSA to fill that void. So I think that their wide receiver room is honestly top 3 or 4 in the SEC with some upside to be even higher.
Yeah.
Cam Coleman's going to be phenomenal. Singleton's going to be really good. Those are two guys who could potentially be 1,000-yard receivers. And you throw in those guys like Simmons, Thompson, and Fields, who could all combine for, another 1,000 between the three of them, maybe a little higher. Going to be really good. I know you mentioned the freshman Mabson in the running back room. I think he's going to be a key contributor, but I kind of like Robinson a little bit too from UConn. Ran for I think 750 yards and 8 touchdowns for him. He's a guy that they're 3 and 4 on the depth chart. It is going to be a big committee, but I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year those two are both in your top three from carries and a yardage standpoint. I am high on Jackson Arnold, probably higher than I was with him at Oklahoma last year. I think this is kind of his chance to really kind of get focused back on football. Not that he wasn't focused, but you know, there were a lot of distractions around that team with injuries and stuff. So this just kind of gives him a chance to focus on football again. And I mean, the guys he's throwing to, if he's even 70% of the lives up to 70% of what he was coming out of high school, this Auburn team's going to be really dangerous. And if things aren't working out there, if he gets banged up a little bit, yeah, they're probably from a three deep at quarterback, the deepest in the SEC. Ken Daniels, isn't great, but he threw for 1,700 yards at Stanford last year. Had a bunch of interceptions, but he's a guy who you maybe don't feel terrible about being QB 2 or 3, and then with Deuce Knight back there too. Deuce Knight's going to be really good for them after this year, through next year, depending on how Jackson Arnold pans out. Kind of the future of that team is kind of what sticks out to me most on offense. I mean, I'm with you on their offensive line. They're starting all upperclassmen. Juniors are better, and they're going to be solid there. I think that's going to kind of help their running game with not having a true RB1 on their team. Having a really good offensive line is going to mask that running back problem a little bit. It'll be interesting to see who starts at tight end for them. I know Preston Howard and Brandon Frazier are kind of the 1 and 2 guy. I think Preston Howard has a little bit more of the upside as a receiver. I haven't had a chance to dive in too deep on his run or his pass blocking and run blocking. I would say Frazier, just looking at the numbers and the builds, may be your better blocker from the tight end room.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that you're really hitting on as you're going through it is again their total depth of their offense and how they have multiple things that can attack you offensively. I absolutely agree with you on Robinson and Madsen. I think they're in the top 2 or 3 and maybe the top 2 in carries once you get into the season. And then Austin and Cobb kind of fit in there. And again, you mentioned the line being able to open holes enough for that running back for committee to be good. The 2 tight ends, again, you use them as you need them. Split Howard out wide, play him in the slot some. If you need the running game, then you put Frazier in there. I just think there's a lot that they have on offense to attack you with. And again, the Horatio Fields, we're not talking about needing him as a top 3 receiver, but when you can look at him and say he's your 5th guy, that's pretty good. And that's right up there to me with the depth that LSU has. Maybe not the top end that Alabama has, but a deeper room than Alabama, and maybe the top end of Alabama too. So I agree, they're top 3 or 4 wide receiver room that could go higher. So I just think there's a lot of talent there on offense and a lot of experience. And so and I think it's a perfect situation for Arnold to get his mind back right, work his way into. And Auburn's a tough place to play. We'll get into their schedule, but their tough games are at home this year. And so that to me really plays into their advantage there. So if I'm jumping over to the defensive side of the ball, to me, and Auburn always to me is always known for athletic guys on defense. They have usually a solid defensive front, but when you look at their edge guys and linebackers, they're always guys that can flat out run and get after you. And that's no different this year. You got Kedrick Falk at defensive end, and he can get after you. And then your linebacker group has DeMarcus Riddick, Robert Woodyard, and Lee as a cornerback. You got Xavier Atkins, who's a transfer from LSU, who's really athletic there at linebacker. And then you also have Elijah Melendez, who's a freshman. So you've got some guys at linebacker that can really go. And then their defensive line, where I really like their defensive line this year, is they've got guys in the last two classes that are big guys that can eat up blocks. Malik Blockton, big defensive tackle. Jordan Crawford, who's not going to start this year, but he's a nose guard. And that big guy, again, I saw him at the Under Armour here in Atlanta, and he's a big physical guy that can eat up blocks. The starter at nose guard will probably be Bobby Travis. And again, he's an experienced guy that's a transfer. So I really like their front seven and what they can do athletically. And then also in the center with their line being able to eat up blocks. And then when you get into the secondary, I mentioned Kay and Lee. I really like their safeties. Caleb Harris, I think, is a good safety. Sylvester Smith, who's a nickel back, strong safety type guy, star. Everybody plays with a star now. And then their free safety to me is a really interesting position. You've got Kinsley Falston that's back, but to me, I think the starter is going to be Jacoby Matthews, the transfer that set out last year, that 2 years ago started at A&M. So I think if you put Matthews, Smith, and Harris, you got three right there that between the nickelback and the safeties that play close to the line of scrimmage, and then Matthews at free safety. I think they match up really good. And then the other cornerbacker, it would be Jay Crawford. Again, just a lot of athleticism across their defense. It's not going to be a top four defense in the SEC, but they're going to be a good defense in the SEC, probably in the top half of the SEC, maybe even top five, top six. So to me, when you combine that with the talent they have on offense, I just think there's a lot there and they can win a lot of games.
Yeah, what my favorite player on their defense is Keldrick Falk by far. Coming off a 7-sack season, I think he's poised for double-digit sacks this year. He's going to be the guy who really anchors that defensive line. They do have some other big bodies who can beat up blocks, like you said. Another thing that I really like, some of the other teams we've talked about are, a lot of juniors, a lot of seniors starting. They've got Blockton at defensive tackle. They've got DeMarcus Riddick at linebacker. They've got Caleb Harris, A. Crawford, Vester Smith. And then if Kinsley Faustin's playing some too, those are all guys who are true sophomores in this program that are, guys who are gonna play a huge role in this defense. But if you're Hugh Freeze and I think that some of their woes are going to come with, him losing games they shouldn't, like you said.
He always does.
But, depending on how things shape up, as long as they improve a little bit, knowing that they're going to have five, key guys from the defense definitely return. And then, you've got a few juniors in there with Lee at cornerback and Woodyard, who, may potentially be draft risks at the end of the year. But you're talking about a team that's going to be athletic, not the best in the league, a little above middle of the pack. And they're going to return anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 guys next season on this starting lineup for the defense. So, the quality in which that Hugh Freeze has kind of been able to recruit these guys is what sticks out to me. And Caleb Harris is a guy I really liked. I am a sucker for some of those Alabama high school guys, especially coming from a school like Thompson a few years ago. That is, to me, when you talk Alabama high school football, Thompson is, at the top of the list. A lot of the guys they churn out, maybe not always, NFL, starters, but phenomenal college guys that just kind of have that work ethic. Yeah, Jacoby Matthews is the interesting piece on this defense. Yeah, he's a guy who's, bounced around from A&M to community college to focus on school, kind of stepped away from everything at one point. Yeah, the talent is undeniable. I mean, his freshman year, he's looking like an all-star at the six or an all-American 6 games into the season. And I've seen some video of him before he enrolled at Auburn. The dude's still in shape. I do want to see how being away from the sport, for a year plus treats him. But if he wins out that starting free safety spot, they're going to be in a good position.
Yeah, I think so. Again, that gets into, like I said, to me, they're my surprise team. So I'm going to run down their schedule. You guys might disagree with me, and everybody might disagree with me, but I've got them winning a lot of games. So everybody's talking about Baylor, and it's a must-win game for them. I think they win the game, and I think they're just a better team than Baylor. Love Aranda and love what that Baylor has offensively, but when I look at both sides of the ball, Auburn's just better. Then they play Ball State, South Alabama. I think they win both those games. Interesting game here. They play on game 4. They go to Norman to play Oklahoma. Again, everybody's talking about Oklahoma and how good they're going to be, and John Mateer and those type of things. I'm going to call this the Jackson Arnold game because I think he's going to have a lot to prove going back into Oklahoma. And again, I just think Auburn's, when I look at the position matchups, Auburn's better on the offensive line. They're better at wide receiver, maybe not better at running back. Quarterback, maybe not better, but Arnold's going to compete. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Oklahoma's very good, better defensive line. But I think Auburn is as good in the secondary and as good at linebacker as Oklahoma is. So when you start looking at the matchups, it's a very close game. And that's a game that Auburn should have won last year. Thorne threw an interception late that got returned by Kip Lewis for a touchdown. I just think this is a game that Auburn is going to circle and it's going to mean a lot to them. And I honestly think Auburn's going to go into Oklahoma and get that game. So I think they start out 4-0. Texas A&M, you covered this game when you talked about A&M. This is one I think they go on the road after a big win, and I think they lose. So I think they lose this game. So now they're 4-1 with Georgia at home. And Georgia, they always play Georgia tough at home. I don't think they're going to beat Georgia, but I'm not going to be surprised if they did. I think when you talk about home field advantages, obviously we think highly of LSU's home field advantage, and rightfully so. But I would put Georgia's in there too. I would put Georgia, LSU at the top. But then after that, I put Auburn as at a home field advantage, and South Carolina right there in Tennessee. Those 5 to me stand out. And so that Georgia game at home is going to be a tough game for Georgia to go in there and win. I'll say Georgia ekes that game out, so that puts them at 4-2. From here, I really love how the schedule plays out for Auburn after this. They got Mizzou at home. I think they beat them. They go on the road to Arkansas. I think by this time they're playing well enough across the board. And again, total talent across the board. I just think they're better in Arkansas and win that game. Kentucky, I think they win that game. They got to go to Vanderbilt. Could be a tough game. Pavia's beat them 2 years in a row. So again, Vanderbilt's not normally a game that you circle, but I certainly think Auburn and Hugh Freeze have this one circled. I don't think he wants to go 0-3 against Pavia, and I just think the talent level is too much. I think Vanderbilt wins that game, sets up their last 2 games. Mercer, that's a win. And then you have Alabama coming to Jordan Hare. Auburn's setting at 9-2. Again, I'm going to go back to last year's Alabama team. They showed signs of struggling on the road, lost at Oklahoma, lost at Vanderbilt, lost at Tennessee. And that's a tough, tough place to play. I'm not sold Simpson's going to be an elite quarterback. I think Auburn beats Alabama at home. So I have Auburn going 10-2 with the losses being to A&M and UGA. And I think Auburn is a threat to make the playoffs. I know I may be one of the few that says that, but when you look at the schedule, how it matches up, and the total talent that they have on their team, they're not going to be an easy out.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think from their talent and how the schedule lines up, I agree with you. The only thing I see is the Hugh Freeze factor and 2 games that I have circled. Like my favorite game of the season for them is Baylor. They get to play that Friday night before Labor Day, which means, I'm going to get to watch every play of it with it being Friday, not interfering with some of the other games. I love that one. I think they win that one. But two I have circled are two home games against teams that on paper they are so much better than, in my opinion. And that's the Missouri game, October 18th, and the Kentucky game, November 1st. Those just seem like Hugh Freeze potential loss games. Like Kentucky shouldn't even, be competitive in that game. But that's where I could see, Calzada going crazy in that one. I think 10-2 though is, if it's not Hugh Freeze coaching, I'm like 100%. Auburn's a really talented team, but with Hugh Freeze, I see at least one of those two games being dropped. But now that they could beat Georgia, still drop one of those, and they're still at 10-2. Hugh Freeze just somehow loses a game he should never lose every
And
year.
every year, there's no question about it. Even when he was at Liberty and had them rolling, before he got that Auburn job, he beats Arkansas, goes into Arkansas with the Liberty team and just dominates them. Then goes on the road or excuse me, not on the road, comes back home. They went on the road to Arkansas and dominated them. Comes back home and loses to New Mexico State in Diego Pavia. So no question about it. Freeze loses at least one every year. Go back to Ole Miss. I think it was 2018 maybe. And if it wasn't for losing that home game against Arkansas, they knock Alabama out of the playoffs and they win the West. And that Arkansas team is no reason that they should have went in there and won. Um, but they did. So Freeze, he does. He always loses a game he shouldn't, and that certainly is a factor. Probably bounces them to 9-3. I'm going to take their ceiling though and go 10-2, just because I just think again. Auburn is a type of team when you have no confidence in them, and no one's picking them to go 6-6 or 5-7 this year. I think most people think they're 8-4 type team, but when no one's talking about them, and when their home schedule is on their side, which this year it is. They're a type of team that gets momentum in that crowd, and that's where I'm just basing it on those type of things and the talent they have. I just really see this being a year that typical Auburn team that once every 5 or 6 years that they just go on a run and win one with voodoo Jordan Hare magic, which they do.
Yeah. Auburn LSU is probably my favorite SEC rivalry. I like the LSU Florida series. I don't love going to Gainesville for games. Auburn's a place that I really enjoy going to watch LSU Auburn duel it out. The last time I was there was Jaden's first year with us, and that was such a disastrous game for both teams. And then I believe, and I may be making this up, but I think Sage Ryan made the pick or stripped it from Coy Moore to get us the ball back there.
I think it was Greg Brooks came
If
over the top of it.
That's right, it was Greg Brooks.
But you're right. And so many games that LSU's played at Jordan Hare have been just nail biters one way or another that are just crazy type games, and that one certainly was.
And I've really missed this series the last couple of seasons not happening every year. But I'm gonna say I'm kind of glad it's not happening this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to play them in Jordan Hare this
Yeah.
year. They got the type of team that can beat you at home. And I don't care, that game that you mentioned, Jaden's first year, that was not a really good Auburn team. I remember the week before, they barely eked out a game against Missouri that Missouri should have beat them on their home field. So we're going over to the game, and I'm thinking, okay, their fans are down, and we're going to come in here, and this is going to be okay. And I've been there, like you're saying, probably 7, 8 times out of LSU games. I've been to Jordan Hare more than any other place. So I should have known better. We walk into the stadium, it's a 6:30 kickoff. We walk in about 6:20 and their fans are just going nuts. It's full. And they hit a couple deep pass plays in that first quarter on us. And it was, from there on, it was, just fighting to try to get a win in a game we should have won and did eke out. But that's just such a great environment to watch a game in.
Oh yeah, it is. So normally I would get tickets through LSU with the LSU fans. Well, I was kind of undecided on going. I've got a friend in Birmingham that I travel with. He's a big Auburn fan, so he comes here for Auburn games. I go stay in Birmingham and then we drive over to Auburn. And we bought tickets last minute and we ended up sitting in kind of expanded Auburn student section. I'm in a purple LSU polo with white and gold paint splatter look all over it. We sit down. He's in his Auburn shirt, so nobody's really messing with him. And then these three girls in their Auburn colored overalls come and sit next to us who are in college. And that I remember that first quarter with their deep pass plays. They're just like ragging me. They're nice about it, but I'm just hearing them, all first quarter, and they're definitely enjoying being in college and going to the Auburn game. But then, that fourth quarter really kind of changed things. And it went from like them ragging me a little bit to being like, okay, don't rag us. Because the way that they came out, no, they were nowhere near as talented as LSU was. But the way they started that first quarter, they should have scored more points.
They should have.
And they really should have, made LSU kind of turn away and kind of get blown out in that game. But, geez, I need to look up. There were so many turnovers in that game.
By
It
both
was,
teams.
yeah, it was the ugliest game of football that I've ever been to. It
I
was
think
just bad.
Yeah, there was that game and then the Florida game where we kicked a field goal late to win. In both those games, it was like whoever made the last mistake was gonna lose, and they did. They threw that interception that Brooks got. We were ahead at the time, but we were, to your point, they jumped on us early, and we were like backs against the ropes, knockout punches could hit us at any time. And if you remember, BJ Aguilera got a strip sack. That's Sweets'
Yeah.
guy, and that strip sack, and then we scored a touchdown off of that fumble, and that kind of calmed things down for us to say, okay, look, we're back in the game. I think it might have made it 14-7. I don't know exactly on the score, but it calmed us down to where we could play in the game and then ease our way back into it. And then eventually, I think Emory had about a 20-yard touchdown run that put us ahead, and he played well in that game. I think he also caught a pass that he scored a touchdown on. So that was our offense in the second half. But it was a crazy game. And like I say, it's just a great atmosphere to watch a game.